The United States Army wrote its own official history of the Ardennes, and it is not a generous book. Hugh Cole produced it for the Office of the Chief of Military History, and the register never warms up. Cole audits ammunition dumps, he counts trucks, he is faintly impatient with almost everyone in the story, a good many Americans included. Compliments are not what that volume is for. Then he reaches the German army that made the deepest penetration of the whole offensive, and he stops the narrative to say something about its headquarters. He calls it probably the best German staff on the Western Front. Not the most fanatical, not the luckiest, the best. That is the United States Army. In the volume it printed for its own officers to study, describing the enemy staff that came nearest to the Meuse. The men who actually fought that army agreed. Bruce Clarke met it twice. In September 1944, as a colonel commanding Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, Clarke fought it in the Lorraine. 3 months later, as a brigadier general commanding Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division, he fought it again at St. Vith. He stopped it both times, and he spent much of the rest of his career telling American officers that the man on the other side had understood precisely what he was trying to do. After the war, that man lectured at the United States Military Academy at West Point. He addressed conferences of American general officers. He advised NATO. He was signed as a consultant to a Hollywood production about the Battle of the Bulge. He wrote a chapter on the Ardennes for an American publisher in a collection of German generals' accounts that sold well in the United States. He appears by name in Cole's official history, in Charles MacDonald's account of the battle, in Antony Beevor's, in every serious English-language treatment of the offensive written since. He appears in them twice over, once as the commander of Fifth Panzer Army, and once as a source. That second appearance is the one worth sitting with. The American account of what happened on the German side of the Ardennes and this man's account of what happened on the German side of the Ardennes are in several important places the same piece of paper. He commanded the army. Then he helped write the history of the army he commanded for the army that stopped it, and the United States Army paid him to do it. His first name was Hasso. Hasso Eckhard Freiherr von Manteuffel was born in Potsdam on January 14, 1897, into a Prussian military family that already had a field marshal in it. He went to the cadet school at Naumburg on the Saale as a boy of 11 and to the main cadet institute at Berlin-Lichterfelde at 14. He was commissioned into the Hussar Regiment von Zieten, the 3rd Hussars of Brandenburg, in the spring of 1916, and he was on the Somme by the autumn, where a shell fragment went through his right thigh on October 12th. He stood 5 feet 2 inches. He rode competitively and he rode well, which in the cavalry of that era was a career in itself. The Versailles army had room for 4,000 officers and no more, and it moved him almost nowhere for a decade. He was still a first lieutenant in 1932 at the age of 35. Then the expansion came, and with it, Heinz Guderian, whose inspectorate of armored troops he joined in 1937, and who is the reason a hussar with a jockey's build ended up in tanks. Captain in 1933, major in 1936, lieutenant colonel on the 1st of March, 1940, running the directing staff at the 2nd Panzer Training School at Berlin-Krampnitz. He went to Russia in 1941 as a battalion commander in the 7th Panzer Division, Rommel's old division, and he took over one of its rifle regiments in August, after its commander was killed. He was a colonel by the end of that year, and had the Knight's Cross by that winter. His division reached the Moscow-Volga Canal at Yakroma in the last days of November, and Alaric Searle, in his study of Manteufel's career, records that Manteuffel took the bridge there on the 28th, and then had to give it up because there was nothing behind him to hold it with. North Africa came next, in December 1942. He was given a provisional formation in Tunisia, assembled from whatever was to hand, pieces of the 10th Panzer Division, paratroopers, paratroop engineers, and Italian Bersaglieri, and the Germans simply called it Division von Manteuffel. He fought it through the spring of 1943, collapsed with illness, and was evacuated to Germany. General Major on the 1st of May, 1943, back to the Eastern Front in August as commander of the 7th Panzer Division, and in November he retook Zhytomyr with a force that Searle describes as minimal for the task. Oak leaves to the Knight's Cross on November 23rd. Late in January 1944, he took over Panzer Grenadier Division Grossdeutschland, the Army's showpiece formation, and was made a general lieutenant on the 1st of February. He equipped it with 4 tank battalions, 1 of Tigers and 3 of Panthers, which no ordinary Panzer division on that front was getting. Swords to the Knight's Cross on February 22nd. If you are finding this valuable, subscribing genuinely helps. It tells the algorithm this kind of research is worth showing to more people. The high point of the Grossdeutschland Command was a defensive action in Romania at Târgu Frumos in the first week of May 1944, and it is the first place in this story where you have to slow down and look at where a number comes from. The divisional figures, as Searle reproduces them, are 350 Soviet tanks destroyed in 3 days, 200 more damaged, against 10 German tanks lost. I think that is the least reliable figure in Manteuffel's entire file, and the reason is structural rather than personal. It is a German divisional claim, compiled by the formation making it, with no Soviet return to check it against, and no independent count of the wreckage. Kill claims and defensive armored actions were assembled from unit reports and gun crew reports, and the same burning hull was routinely claimed twice. The Târgu Frumos figure has been repeated in English for 70 years because it appears in a German account and nobody has a Soviet one to set beside it. State it, name where it came from, and do not build anything on it. Searle also records what Manteuffel took out of that fighting as a matter of doctrine, and it is a more interesting result than the kill claim. He concluded that the Soviet heavy tanks then arriving on that front, the IS-2s and the upgunned T-3485s, could be handled by experienced German crews provided the crews declined to fight them frontally, and that the method was what he called hammer and anvil. An anti-tank gun and artillery line fixes the attacking armor in place. A mobile force comes into its flank while it is fixed. That is the tactical idea he carried west with him in September 1944, and it requires exactly two things to work: room to maneuver and fuel. That is the pattern to keep in view, because it is about to get much larger. On the 1st of September, 1944, Manteuffel was promoted General der Panzertruppe and given command of Fifth Panzer Army on the Western Front. That is the third rung of the German general officer ladder, above General Lieutenant and below General Oberst, and it is where he finished. He never held General Oberst, and he never held General Feldmarschall. At 47, he was one of the youngest men in the German army wearing 3 stars. The standard reference compilations give the 9th of September for that appointment, where Searle gives the 1st, and the difference is a week that nobody has resolved. His first serious business against the Americans came almost immediately, and it went badly. In the second half of September 1944, Fifth Panzer Army was ordered to counterattack the flank of the Third Army in the Lorraine, around Arracourt, east of Nancy. The instrument was a set of newly raised panzer brigades with crews who had never worked with each other. Opposite them was the 4th Armored Division of the 12th Corps, and Combat Command A of that division was commanded by Colonel Bruce Clarke. The arithmetic of that week is on the record. Of 262 tanks and assault guns the Germans put into the fighting near Arracourt, 86 were destroyed outright, 114 were damaged or broken down, and 62 were still running at the end of the month. Clarke's combat command, lost 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers. Manteuffel had lost roughly 3/4 of his armor as a functioning force in a week against an American armored division fighting in fog that grounded the fighter bombers for much of it. 10 weeks later, he was told to do the same thing again, on a larger scale, in worse country in December. The plan he was given had been drafted at the highest level and was not open to argument in its essentials. Sources differ on when he first saw it. Searle puts the briefing on the 3rd of November, 1944, at Field Marshal Walter Model's headquarters at Krefeld, delivered by Alfred Jodl and Gerd von Rundstedt. The HistoryNet biography of him puts his first exposure to the concept on the 18th of October. What is not in dispute is his reaction, which was that the plan as written could not be executed, and that Model said the same thing. 3 armies would attack out of the Eifel. 6th Panzer Army under Sepp Dietrich on the right, 5th Panzer Army in the center, 7th Army under Erich Brandenberger on the left, holding the southern shoulder. The objective was Antwerp, across the Meuse, splitting the 21st Army group from the Americans. 5th Panzer Army's own task was to cross the Meuse on the 3rd day of the operation, on the axis running through Bastogne toward Namur. Manteuffel's army for that job had 3 corps. On the right, 66 Corps under General der Artillerie Walter Lucht, with the 18th and 62nd Volksgrenadier Divisions. In the center, 58 Panzer Corps under General der Panzertruppe Walter Krüger, with the 116th Panzer Division and the 560th Volksgrenadier Division. On the left, 47 Panzer Corps under General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, with the 2nd Panzer Division under Colonel Meinrad von Lauchert, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division under General Major Heinz Kokott, and Panzerlehr Division under General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein. Colonel Otto Rehmer's Führer Escort Brigade was attached during the fighting at St. Vith. Hold on to Lauchert's name. It comes back at the end of this story in a way that is genuinely strange. Manteuffel did win 3 arguments about how the attack would be conducted, and Cole records all 3 in the official history, which is the reason we know about them at all. The plan called for a 2-hour artillery preparation opening at 0800 hours. Manteuffel argued that the enemy literally must not be awakened, in Cole's rendering of it, and that the assault infantry should be moving the moment the guns spoke. Hitler compromised and moved the guns to 0530. Second, Manteuffel wanted infiltration by small detachments through the American line before the barrage, the way both sides had been doing it in Russia for 3 years. Cole notes the result, which is that only in the Fifth Panzer Army sector were German assault detachments found inside American positions when the opening barrage came down. Third, Jodl wanted the 2 Panzer Corps fed in one behind the other. Manteuffel wanted both attacking side by side from the opening minute, and Hitler approved it. That is 3 tactical amendments to a plan drafted by the Armed Forces High Command, obtained by an army commander who had held the appointment for 3 months. It is also worth noticing what none of the 3 touched. Not the objective, not the frontage, not the fuel. The fuel is where the whole thing comes apart, and Cole lays the arithmetic out in a chapter of the official history that nobody quotes because it has no drama in it whatsoever. By the 16th of December, there were 4,680,000 gallons of petroleum, oil, and lubricants in the hands of the Western Theater Command. Perhaps half of that, Cole writes, was in dumps back at the Rhine, which in December 1944 meant behind a rail and road network being worked over daily by Allied aircraft. The Theater Command's own estimate of consumption was 260,000 gallons a day. Cole then records that the senior German quartermasters put the real figure at 4 times that, meaning Army Group B would burn something on the order of 1 million gallons on each day of the operation. Run the division. On the Theater Command's own optimistic number, the entire stock supported 18 days. On the quartermaster's number, it supported 4.5, and half of it was on the wrong side of the Rhine. The armored divisions carried in their own tanks and jerry cans fuel for perhaps 90 to 100 miles of normal cruising. The distance from the start line to the Meuse crossings was inside that, just on a road march in dry weather with no fighting. It was not a road march, the weather was not dry, and there was a great deal of fighting. The ammunition column reads the same way. Hitler released 100 trains of ammunition from his personal reserve, plus 4 units of what the German system counted as a basic load. By the 13th of December, Army Group B had 15,099 tons in its dumps. Projected daily consumption for the offensive was around 1,200 tons, and Cole records that the artillery commander of the neighboring 6th Panzer Army had asked for 12 to 15 units of artillery ammunition for the first 10 days, and had 1.5 units with his guns and 2 more in prospect. I want to be precise about what that means as a documentary matter, because it is the strongest single piece of evidence in this story, and it does not come from any German general's account. It comes from Cole, working in 1965, from captured German quartermaster returns, and the interrogation record, publishing under the imprint of the United States Army. The men who planned the offensive knew the fuel state before the guns fired. It is in the paperwork of the organization that planned it. Whatever else the Ardennes offensive was, it was not an operation whose logistical impossibility was discovered afterward. 2,168 tanks and assault guns were allocated to Army Group B and the Armed Forces High Command Reserve for the attack. 13 infantry and 7 armored divisions went in with the first wave, with 29 infantry and 12 armored divisions available, if 15th Army joined, which it did not. Across the whole offensive, the Germans committed over 410,000 men, just over 1,400 tanks and armored fighting vehicles, 2,600 artillery pieces, and over 1,000 combat aircraft. The Allied force that eventually engaged came to more than 700,000 men. The Americans in front of Fifth Panzer Army on the 16th of December were the 8th Corps of the First Army, under Major General Troy Middleton. Middleton was holding roughly 85 miles of front, with the equivalent of 3 divisions and change, because the Ardennes was where the American command had decided it could afford to be thin. On his northern sector sat the 106th Infantry Division under Major General Alan Jones in the line for 5 days, 3 regiments deep in the Schnee-Eifel. To the south sat the 28th Infantry Division under Major General Norman Coda, which had been mauled in the Hürtgen forest and had been sent to the Ardennes to rest. Lucht's 2 Volksgrenadier divisions went round the 106th on both flanks. The 18th Volksgrenadier attacked north and south of the Schnee-Eifel in a concentric movement, and the 62nd Volksgrenadier came in through the Grosslangenfeld and Heckenscheid sector. Cole's figure for what that produced is precise, and it is the largest mass surrender of American troops in the European theater. By nightfall on the 17th of December, in his words, some 8,000 or 9,000 Americans were effectively bottled up west of the Schnee-Eifel. That was the 422nd Infantry under Colonel George Deschenaux and the 423rd under Colonel Charles Cavender, with their supporting units. The 424th under Colonel Alexander Reed got out to the south. In front of Coda, the 2nd Panzer Division and the 26th Volksgrenadier hit the 110th Infantry Regiment under Colonel Hurley Fuller, holding a stretch of the Our River that no single regiment could hold, and drove west toward the town of Clairvaux and its castle. Cole's account of the 18th of December has American observers at the northern roadblock seeing figures in field gray entering a patch of woods on the Clairvaux road, and behind them, Locher's 2 tank battalions coming through the town, and behind those Bayerling's Panzer Lehr. Both sides of that opening had gone almost exactly as Manteuffel had drawn it, and then the timetable stopped working in 2 places, for reasons that were entirely American. St. Vith was the first. It was a road junction with 6 roads running into it, and Fifth Panzer Army needed it for the traffic, not for the ground. The German plan expected it to fall on or soon after the 18th of December. What arrived instead was Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division, under Bruce Clarke, who had last seen this army in the Lorraine, together with Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division, the 112th Infantry of the 28th Division, the surviving 424th Infantry, and eventually the 82nd Airborne Division on the shoulder above them under Matthew Ridgway's 18th Airborne Corps. Robert Hasbrouck commanded the 7th Armored. Clarke held the town. St. Vith fell on the evening of the 21st of December, 3 days behind the German schedule, and the Americans withdrew west of the Somme River on the 23rd. For 3 days, everything 5th Panzer Army wanted to push west had to go through the road net south of the town instead, on forest tracks and thaw mud. The cost of that is a case where German and American accounting produced different numbers from the same fighting, so here are both. The history off-war account of the engagement puts the American force in the St. Vith defense at about 22,000 men and its losses at 8,000. The compiled figure drawn from the wider campaign literature gives 12,500 killed, wounded, taken prisoner or missing, together with 88 tanks and 25 armored cars. The gap between 8,000 and 12,500 is a question of whether you count the 106th Infantry Division's losses on the Schnee-Eifel inside the St. Vith battle or outside it. Say the lower figure, and you are describing the armored defense. Say the higher figure, and you are including the division that was destroyed to the east of it. Neither is wrong. They are answers to different questions. Set against the army on its right, those 3 days look different again. 6th Panzer Army had the priority, the SS Panzer Divisions, the shorter road to the Meuse and the better armor allocation. It was stopped on the Elsenborn Ridge inside the first 48 hours and never recovered its axis. 5th Panzer Army had the secondary role, the Volksgrenadier Divisions and the longer road, and it produced the deepest penetration of the offensive. Robert Citino's reading of the late war German offensives in the Wehrmacht's Last Stand puts the weight of that on terrain and on American disposition rather than on one commander outperforming another, and the disposition is the part worth holding on to. The northern shoulder was held by divisions that were fresh, dug in, and sitting on high ground. The center was held by a division resting from the Hürtgen forest, and a division 5 days out of the boat. Bastogne was the second place the timetable failed, and the surrender demand that came out of it is the cleanest test in this entire story of how a general's post-war account should be handled. Bastogne mattered for the same reason St. Vith did. Roads, 7 of them. Luttwitz's 47 Panzer Corps was supposed to take it in passing and keep going. What got there first, by a margin of hours, was Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division under Colonel William Roberts, broken into 3 teams under Cherry, de Sobry, and O'Hara, and then the 101st Airborne Division, trucked up from Reims, with Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe commanding in the absence of its division commander. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion came in with them. The garrison came to something over 22,800 men, of whom about 11,000 enlisted and 800 officers were the Airborne Division itself. On the 22nd of December, at about 11:30 in the morning, 4 Germans came up to F Company of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment under a white flag. 2 of them were officers, Lieutenant Helmuth Henke of the Panzer Lehr Operations Section and Major Wagner of 47 Panzer Corps staff, with 2 enlisted men of the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment. They carried a typed demand in German and English. It said that the fortune of war was changing, that there was only one possibility to save the encircled American troops from total annihilation, and that one German artillery corps and 6 heavy anti-aircraft battalions stood ready to annihilate them. 2 hours were allowed. McAuliffe's reply was one word, typed and centered on a sheet of paper: nuts. Signed A.C. McAuliffe, commanding. Now the documentary question. Who wrote the demand? Peter Caddick Adams, in Snow and Steel, establishes that it was issued by Luttwitz on his own authority, against the wishes of his army commander. Kokot of the 26th Volksgrenadier and Bayerlein of Panzer-Lehr both expected it to fail. The artillery corps and the 6 anti-aircraft battalions in the text did not exist in any form capable of doing what the note threatened, which makes the document a bluff signed by a corps commander who had no means of executing it. Caddick Adams also reproduces Manteuffel's own statement on it. I did not order either the writing or sending of a note of this kind. That sentence is a claim. It is a post-war statement by an officer describing his own conduct in an episode that became, in the United States, the single most famous exchange of the battle. Treat it exactly as this channel treats any memoir assertion. There is an independent case for it, which is that the note is consistent with Luttwitz's known habits and inconsistent with Manteuffel's insistence elsewhere on not advertising his own weakness. There is also an obvious reason a German general in 1945 and after would want distance from a document that produced the most celebrated American one-word reply of the war. Both things are true at once, and the honest form on air is to say that the authorship rests with Luttwitz on Caddick Adams' evidence, and that Manteuffel's denial of involvement is his own account of himself. The relief of Bastogne came on the 26th of December, when a tank of Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams's 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, made contact at about 1650 hours. Until the 23rd, the same weather that kept the Allied air forces on the ground made resupply of the perimeter by air impossible, so the first 3 days of the siege were fought on what the defenders had brought in on their trucks. Peter Shrivers, in Those Who Hold Bastogne, published by Yale University Press, is the historian who has done the most with what those days did to the town itself and to the Belgians living in it, under German shellfire first, and then under American shellfire once the perimeter moved. That is the part of the Ardennes literature the operational histories pass over, and it is the part where the Bastogne story stops being an anecdote about a one-word reply. While Bastogne held, the spearhead went past it, and this is the closest the German army got to the Meuse in 1944. Lauscher's 2nd Panzer Division pushed a Kampfgruppe under Major von Koschenhausen out along the Marcher Road toward Dinant. And by the 23rd and 24th of December, it was in the villages of Celle and Foy Notre Dame. Cole's measurement of that position is the number to remember, only 4 or 5 miles from the bridges at Dinant. Koschenhausen's main body was halted, in Cole's words, perhaps 5,000 meters behind the detachment in Foy Notre Dame, roughly 4 miles. That is where the offensive stopped. It stopped there for the reasons the fuel arithmetic predicted. Cole records the radio traffic out of that pocket on the 25th of December, reporting dwindling ammunition and no fuel, and the divisional commander reporting that his tactical units could not move in daylight because of Allied aircraft. The weather had broken on the 23rd and the fighter bombers were up. Christmas morning at 0800 hours, Combat Command B of the 2nd Armored Division attacked. In an operation Joseph Collins of the 7th Corps and Ernest Harmon of the 2nd Armored had worked out the previous afternoon, with the 84th Infantry Division under Alexander Bowling on their flank, and British armor of the 29th Armored Brigade sitting on the Meuse bridges behind them. Koschenhausen and nearly 600 of his men walked out to Rochefort. Everything the Kampfgruppe owned stayed where it was. Manteuffel spent the first week of January getting what was left of his army back out of the salient, and Robert Citino, in the Wehrmacht's last stand, is worth naming here for the point that the withdrawal was in operational terms the most competent thing the German command did in the whole offensive, and also that it was the withdrawal of a force that no longer had the fuel to do anything else. On the 8th of January, Model conceded the offensive had failed. Then the Eastern Front again, and a set of numbers that make the Ardennes look well-resourced. In early March 1945, most sources giving the 10th, Manteuffel replaced Erhard Raus in command of 3rd Panzer Army on the Oder in front of Stettin. Searle gives the 11th for the day he took over, and HistoryNet gives the 2nd for the day Hitler ordered it. Searle's figures for what he was given are 242 tanks, 600 to 700 anti-aircraft guns, and no artillery. Facing him, Konstantin Rokossovsky's 2nd Belarusian Front had 951 tanks and over 6,500 artillery pieces. He did not attack toward Berlin when ordered to. He went west, and he took the bulk of his army with him into Anglo-American captivity rather than Soviet. The details of the surrender itself are a genuine muddle in the record, and there is no point pretending otherwise. The standard reference compilations have him surrendering at Haguenau in Mecklenburg on the 3rd of May, 1945, to British troops. Searle has him captured by the British at Schwerin on the same date. The History of War biography has him surrendering to the United States 8th Infantry Division on the 8th of May. The three accounts cannot all be correct, and none of them can be reconciled from the published literature as it stands. What happened after that is the actual subject of this video. Manteuffel was released from captivity in December 1946, according to Searle and to the reference compilations, and in September 1947, according to the History of War biography. No war crimes charges were brought against him by any Allied authority, and within a year of his release, he was working in a professional capacity for the United States Army. The organization was the Historical Division of Headquarters, United States Army Europe, and its Foreign Military Studies program is the single most consequential publishing operation in the history of how Americans understand the Second World War. It began immediately after the German surrender with interrogations of prisoners, most of the earliest conducted at Bad Mondorf in Luxembourg through the summer and autumn of 1945. By 1946, it had moved to written questionnaires. From 1947, it was explicitly producing operational studies for United States Army planning and training, which is to say the American Army was commissioning the defeated German officer corps to write the material its own officers would study. The scale of it is in the division's own published guide to the collection, over 1,000 studies, a complete set at the Office of the Chief of Military History in Washington, District of Columbia, and a near-complete second set at Karlsruhe. The interrogation series is catalogued as the European Theater Historical Interrogations. The A series is the questionnaire answers from 1946 onward. The B series is narrative unit histories from division level up to Army group, added through July of 1948. And here is the detail that tells you what kind of operation this was. The cataloging and indexing of the collection was done by former German officers as well. The published guide names General der Artillerie Friedrich von Böttcher, who had been the German military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, as the man who began the indexing work, and General der Artillerie Anton Freiherr von Bechtolsheim as the man who finished it. German generals wrote the studies. German generals decided how they would be found. That body of writing has since been examined as a literature in its own right. Ronald Smelser and Edward Davies did it in The Myth of the Eastern Front, published by Cambridge University Press in 2008. And their finding is that the officers writing for the Americans produced a sanitized version of events, which then traveled out of the studies into American popular history and lodged there for 2 generations. On the Eastern Front side of the program, the German control group supervising the work was headed by Franz Halder, Chief of the General Staff of the Army from 1938 to 1942. That is the structure Manteuffel wrote inside. He did not build it, he did not run it, and there is nothing in the published record suggesting he shaped its editorial direction. He was one of the officers filling it on the Western Front side, with the best operational detail on Fifth Panzer Army available anywhere on Earth, for the straightforward reason that he had commanded Fifth Panzer Army. Manteuffel's own contribution to that collection, on the guide's listing, is 8 manuscripts. 2 interrogations from the earliest phase, on the mission of Fifth Panzer Army, 14 pages recorded on the 21st of June, 1945, and 10 pages recorded on the 29th and 31st of October. A 13-page statement in 1945, catalogued as A857, a 51-page study in 1946 on the strength, organization, armament, and equipment of troops in battle, catalogued as A872, a 19-page paper on mobile and panzer troops, catalogued as B36, a 43-page account of 5th Panzer Army from the 15th of September to the 12th of October, 1944, catalogued as B37, and then the 2 that matter. Manuscript B151, 148 pages, written in 1946, titled 5th Panzer Army, Ardennes Offensive, and its sequel, catalogued as B151A, 161 pages on the guide's count and undated there. The digitized typescript carbon copy of the sequel that sits on the Internet Archive is a 189-page translation from the German, dated 1953, compiled by the Historical Division's Foreign Military Studies branch. The page count and the date do not match the guide's entry, which is a small thing, and also a reminder that the collection was worked over across at least 7 years by people who did not always agree about what was in it. 459 catalogued pages on the guide's own arithmetic, written by the commander of Fifth Panzer Army about the operations of Fifth Panzer Army for the army Fifth Panzer Army had attacked, while its author was a former prisoner of that army with a career yet to rebuild. I think this is the most important documentary fact about the Ardennes literature, and it is almost never stated plainly. Cole's official history, published in 1965, is a work of serious scholarship that used captured German records where they survived. But German records for the second half of December 1944 largely do not survive, and Cole says so. He writes in his epilogue that what the offensive cost the German army is impossible to say. So for the German side of the story, the official history leans in places on the manuscripts, and the manuscripts were written by the men whose conduct the history describes, after the war, for the organization publishing the history, at a moment when several of them were in some professional or legal jeopardy, and all of them had a reputation in play. That is not an accusation of forgery. Nobody is alleging Manteuffel invented the 2nd Panzer Division's route. It is a statement about what kind of source a historical division manuscript is. It is testimony. It was written to be read by Americans, and its author knew that. Danny Parker put a selection of these manuscripts into print for a general readership as Hitler's Ardennes Offensive, the German view of the Battle of the Bulge, which is how most English-language readers who have encountered this material have encountered it. Read that book knowing what the documents in it are, and it is enormously valuable. Read it as though the pieces are contemporaneous German records, and you have the German general's 1950s account of themselves, in translation, with a British publisher's imprint on it. There was a second channel, and it ran through London. Basil Liddell Hart published The Other Side of the Hill in 1948, issued in the United States as the German General's Talk, built from interviews and correspondence with captured German officers in British custody and after their release. It was the book that introduced the English-speaking public to the idea of a professional German officer corps that had understood modern armored warfare and had been undone by an amateur at the top. It sold, and it stayed in print, and it shaped 70 years of popular writing. John Mearsheimer went through Liddell Hart's papers and published the result in 1988 as Liddell Hart and the Weight of History. And the finding is the reason that book has to be handled as a constructed source rather than a collection of testimony. Mearsheimer documented that Liddell Hart actively solicited from the German generals the specific statements he wanted, including statements crediting his own pre-war writing with having shaped German armored doctrine, and that he was in a position to do favors for men who needed them. The generals were interviewees who wanted a sympathetic hearing in the West. Liddell Hart was an author who wanted his influence on the record. Both parties got what they came for. Manteuffel was in that circuit as well as the American one. He was, on the published record, one of the German officers whose accounts fed the Liddell Hart project, and he stayed in touch with the English-language military writing world for the rest of his life. Then, in 1956, an American publisher brought out The Fatal Decisions, edited by Seymour Friedan and William Richardson, in which 6 German generals each took one turning point of the war. Werner Kreipe took the Battle of Britain, Günther Blumentritt took Moscow, Fritz Bayerlein, who had commanded Panzerlehr under Manteuffel in the Ardennes, took El Alamein. Kurt Seitzler took Stalingrad. Bodo Zimmermann took France in 1944. Manteuffel took the Ardennes. His chapter on the battle, written for an American readership 11 years after it happened, is the version of the German side of the Bulge that entered American popular history. It is the same author as manuscript B151, working the same material for a commercial publisher, without a questionnaire in front of him. And I want to be exact about what the discrepancy is here, because the discrepancy is not what a viewer might expect. Nobody has caught Manteuffel in a large factual lie about the Ardennes. Compare his accounts against Cole, against Charles MacDonald in A Time for Trumpets, against Beaver in Ardennes 1944, and the operational narrative holds up. The routes are right. The core boundaries are right. He is straightforward about Bastogne stopping him, straightforward about the fuel, and straightforward, in a way that a great many of his contemporaries were not, about the fact that the plan was not achievable when he first read it, and that he said so at the time. The discrepancy is in the frame, and it is invisible unless you know how the material was produced. Every one of those accounts is an account of operations. Fuel, roads, corps, divisions, timetables, the weather, the Americans. What a historical division manuscript asks about, and what a chapter in a 1950s American anthology of German generals is structured to answer, is how the battle was fought. Neither asks who ordered it, or why, or what the same army was doing behind the front. The genre has a shape, and the shape excludes a set of questions, which is how the record ended up containing something that was not in the manuscripts, the Liddell Hart interviews, or the American anthology, and only surfaced in 1957 in the Federal Republic, 12 years after the surrender, while its subject was a sitting member of Parliament. Before that, the political career. Manteuffel came out of captivity into the West German rearmament argument and became one of its more visible participants. He published a memorandum in May 1950 arguing for equal German defensive rights, and argued in the newspapers for a German contribution of 12 divisions. Searle credits him with coining the name Bundeswehr for the army that was eventually raised. He joined the Free Democratic Party, was elected to the Bundestag in 1953, and sat on the Parliamentary Defense Committee from 1953 to 1957. He was not, and this is worth stating precisely because it is often assumed, at Himmerod. The conference at Himmerod Abbey in October 1950, where 16 former officers wrote the memorandum that set the German officer corps' price for rebuilding an army, listed Heusinger, Speidel, Röttiger, Kielmansegg, Baudissin, Wiedinghoff, Zenger und Etterlin, Ruge, Furch, and the rest. Manteuffel is not among the 16. His route into the new Federal Armed Forces ran through Parliament and the Defense Committee, not through the Abbey. The party then came apart under him. He left the Free Democrats for the Free People's Party in 1956 and moved to the German Party in 1957. He was, at that point, widely spoken of as a future senior figure in the Bundeswehr. In 1957, an accusation surfaced. In January 1944, while commanding the 7th Panzer Division on the Eastern Front, Manteuffel had a corporal of that division shot. A court-martial had tried the man and sentenced him to imprisonment. Manteuffel, as divisional commander, overruled the court's sentence and ordered him executed by firing squad. He was tried in a West German court in August 1959. His defense, as Searle sets it out, was that the corporal had failed to open fire on a Soviet reconnaissance patrol, which then took 2 German soldiers prisoner, that the division was in a dangerous position, that a recent desertion had produced a crisis of morale, and that he had ordered the execution to restore order. 2 former officers appeared as expert witnesses in support of that reading of the tactical situation: General der Panzertruppe Hermann Balck and Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. The court found no evidence that the corporal had acted out of cowardice. The prosecution asked for 2 years. The court imposed 18 months. He served 4. He gave up his seat in Parliament. The press reaction was divided, and among the former officers who spoke publicly, some of the harshest attacks came from his own side, including the charge that he had been a fanatical supporter of Hitler. Whatever prospect he had of a command in the Bundeswehr ended in 1959. His work with Americans did not. He went on lecturing at West Point. He went on addressing American general officer conferences. He went on advising NATO. And in the early 1960s, when 2 Hollywood studios were separately developing films about the Battle of the Bulge, he was signed as a consultant to the Columbia Pictures Project, which was to be called The 16th of December and was never made. The Warner Brothers film that did get made in 1965 could not approach him because its agreement with Columbia barred it from going to individuals Columbia had already tied up. So it hired a different German general as its technical advisor. It hired Meinrad von Lauchert, who, as a colonel, had commanded the 2nd Panzer Division, the formation that got within 4 or 5 miles of the Meuse bridges at Dinant, and who had been Manteuffel's own subordinate in 47 Panzer Corps. 2 studios, 2 German generals from the same army, advising 2 American films about the battle they had lost, 20 years after it. Here is what the battle cost, in the figures each side actually recorded, and where the 2 sets of books do not agree. The American returns, as Cole publishes them from official records for the 16th of December to the 2nd of January, give 41,315 battle casualties, 4,138 killed, 20,231 wounded, 16,946 missing, against 31,505 replacements received. Cole notes those returns probably were incomplete. Extended to the end of the campaign in late January, the American total is usually given as 81,000, of which 8,407 killed, 46,170 wounded, and 20,905 missing, with the range across Roger Cirillo, McDonald, and other compilers running from 77,000 to more than 83,000. The German figures do not exist in comparable form, and Cole says so directly. What all this cost the German army, he writes, is impossible to say. What he offers instead is two proxies. About 67,000 troops were evacuated from the Army Group B area by rail during December, a figure that also contains casualties from the earlier fighting east of Aachen and sick cases. And German divisional commanders, questioned afterward, gave personal estimates of 2,000 to 3,000 combat effectives lost per division for those formations continuously in line from the start. German official accounting gives a range from 63,000 to over 75,000. The separate United States estimate of German losses is 103,900. Those two figures describe the same battle and differ by a factor approaching 2, and the reason is the one Cole names. The paperwork on the losing side is not there. Armour tells the same story from both directions. The Americans lost 471 medium tanks in the second half of December out of a complement of 1,882, with the campaign total usually given as 800 tanks destroyed. German tank losses, in Cole's words, are unknown but appear to have been very high, probably as much from mechanical failure as from battle damage. The compiled modern figure is 527 to 554 tanks, tank destroyers, and assault guns. The Tank Museum in Bovington, working from the vehicles actually committed, puts it as just under half the Panzer IVs and 40% of the Panthers lost by the 15th of January, perhaps 320 tanks in all. Air losses came to about 1,000 American aircraft, over 647 of them in December, and 353 in Operation Bodenplatte, against about 800 German, at least 500 in December, and 280 in Bodenplatte. And the residual. On the 5th of February, 1945, 7 weeks after the offensive opened, the German army had 190 tanks, 533 assault guns, and 87 Panzerjäger operational on the entire Western Front. Hasso von Manteuffel died at Reith in Austria on the 24th of September, 1978, aged 81. What the record contains is this. A cavalry officer who spent the Versailles decade going nowhere was promoted 5 times in 6 years once the war started, and finished as a General der Panzertruppe at 47, 3 rungs up the ladder and 2 below the top. An army commander who lost 3/4 of his armor in a week in the Lorraine in September 1944 argued the Ardennes plan was unworkable when he was shown it, won 3 tactical amendments to it from the Armed Forces High Command, put a reconnaissance detachment within 4 or 5 miles of the Meuse, and could not fuel it once it got there. A divisional commander who, in January 1944, overruled a court-martial and had a corporal shot, and was convicted of it by a West German court 15 years later and served 4 months. A member of parliament who named the Bundeswehr and lost his seat. And the author of 8 manuscripts, 459 catalog pages, written for the Historical Division of the United States Army, about the operations of the army he had commanded against it, which are among the sources for the official history that calls his staff probably the best on the Western Front. The Americans who fought him respected him. The record of why they said so, in large part, is a record he wrote. That's what the record shows. The sources are in the description. I'll see you in the next one.